about to say 19,215. Let's share our screen. I didn't like that. There we go. And see how that works. The sound was not wonderful last week. We're hoping that it will improve this week. We also have an online student who tends to let me know whether it's worked on that. Okay. In that respect, Diana was my best student last year, entered in, did everything, and did far more than necessary. I still haven't met her, but she drops in this year from time to time. And Kyle and Connor are out today because of a major AP exam, so we are off on our own here, which is fine. Let's fill in some holes. This little introduction to the class here, you might just look at it at some point in your own. But the point is, this class is intended to handle people of multiple abilities and help them to help each other and mentor each other and learn from each other. And the teacher learns as well. We encounter things that will challenge all of us. But one of the big problems with that is, please be patient and don't worry about not understanding everything. From time to time, we'll cover material that challenges everyone, the teacher included. So in an ordinary class or in a standard homogeneous stratified class, one is expected to understand all of the material that comes through. That doesn't mean to say that one does necessarily. But in this class, one will definitely encounter things that will be challenging. And so we just have to be able to bear with those, and they will either resolve themselves or we'll simply attack them later on, and then they will yield to our efforts. Okay, let's see. And it talks about the different roles. I leave this up to you if you would like to think it would be a good idea at some point. And then required for the class, access to an internet-connected computer. Also, one of the things that I have installed on my machine, and I recommend that you do also, is the dictionary search. It's a very useful feature. If you are doing all of your composition work, for example, in our classroom, and all your reading work, all you've got to do is right-click on something. You can find out all about it that way. Okay, a dictionary and thesaurus, and a willingness to consider difficult and unfamiliar material as more of a challenge than an obstacle. Let's just see how we can do with that. Grading policy. I don't like grading policy. Let's not talk about that. When I was teaching at the college, one of the points I tried to make at the very beginning was, this is fascinating material. This is wonderful stuff. I was teaching computer science at the time. And if you find it fascinating and get involved in it, you're not going to have to worry about your grade. And I'm not going to have to worry about your grade. If I get hands popping up saying, is this going to be on the test? That's a different story. That's not the kind of question I want. So let's just see what we can do with that. The classroom place now. I try to do that which we cannot do online. That is to say, interaction, debate, discussion. Much of that we can do online, but that's what the actual classroom is reserved for. The rest of the week we can watch our videos, we can do our compositions and so forth, but the classroom is reserved for that sort of thing. As a result, I tend not to watch videos in class. Sometimes that may be a good thing, though. We may want to watch a little something and discuss it at the same time while we're going to class. We'll just see how that works. Okay, let's go to our agenda here. And I put language immersion up at the top this time. I think it's rather important in that listening to language used well is probably the best way to assimilate it, the best way to make it yours and be able to emulate it. Unfortunately, not everybody works that way, and so some people work better by sight than by listening, in which case I invite you to use whatever is most useful to you. And as a result, I've tried to make a point of finding, in addition to videos on subjects, transcripts of those videos when possible, so that we can look at both of them. And unfortunately, in some cases, I don't get them accurate. We'll see how that works. Okay, the zoo in winter. Did you get a chance to look at that at all? You didn't? Okay. The zoo in winter. It's the content is not terribly important. The content, it's fascinating,
it's
though,
more comical than anything.
It is comical, but it's also indicative of Miller's wonderful sense of humor, and also his ability, for example, to mimic. He must go through 5 or 6 different accents of different things while he's mimicking all of the animals in the zoo and so forth. But more importantly, perhaps, is Jonathan Miller's improvisatory speech. His oratory is absolutely flawless, and it's safe. I've never heard him lapse into profanity, which I'm afraid some of the others do. And so it's a bit of a minefield for a teacher to try to find good material that's also safe. Unfortunately, he doesn't anymore do as much as he did before. He's well into his 70s. But he's done a number of excellent documentaries, which I will recommend and we'll look at from time to time. And if they're of specific interest, then we'll sort of adopt them as ongoing projects. Most of them are quite long. The Body in Question, the one he did on language acquisition is superb as well. And so we'll take a look at those. This was inspired by papers that came in last week. And that's what I like to do. If I can see that there's a topic of interest that's arising and is compelling, then let's by all means run in that direction. In this case, it was an SAT essay on what is a hero, and is a hero a person who does something heroic, or perhaps a person who says something which other people are afraid to say. And I thought that was an interesting point. And of course, right now in the news, we have this particular issue arising, and it's a perfect example of exactly that. Now, I don't want to promote any specific ideology, but I have to admit, you listen to a master speaker, and it's incredibly powerful. It's very persuasive, and indeed, this is an example of that. This is an example. I think of a master speaker, and also perhaps a very good example of learning outside the loop, because the author is indeed a high school dropout. And we see him more and more, not this young man here, he's the one who delivers the speech. But we see Snowden more and more emerging as one of today's great orators. And so it's interesting to listen to it, but I thought it would be nice to analyze briefly what he is talking about here. So here we have this young man. What's his name? If you figure that one out.
Wasn't he another hacker?
He is a hacker, and that was the odd thing. That was what the other paper was that came in last week. It was about a hacker. Or actually, it was a chapter of a book, which was really nicely written as a beginning of the book. Anyway, yes, he is one of the founders of the Tor project. Tor is an acronym that stands for the Onion Router. And that's a different story altogether. But this is the first time I ever met Jacob Appelbaum, or Jakob Appelbaum, I'm sure, as he's being known now since he is living in Berlin, and was very impressed by his delivery and just by his presentation itself. You both got a chance to watch that one, right?
Yeah.
What thoughts did you have about it before we look at the text itself? Did you get a chance, Dawson, to see that one?
No, unfortunately.
Okay.
I like the emotion he put into the speech. It wasn't just black and white. He expressed the words as they were. So I like that.
Exactly. His delivery was wonderful. And indeed, he put emotion into it. In fact, he said when he read it, he cried. And I expect that there were a number of non-dry eyes in the audience listening to it, because he got an incredible innovation afterwards. And at the end, in summing it up, he said he was asked to put this in context for Germany specifically. And Benny said, but that's a hard act to follow. And he's absolutely right. Let's look at why it's a hard act. Now, here's one of the problems we always have when learning language. There are two ways to do it. One of them is entirely vicarious, intuitive. We want to assimilate it naturally and have the language become part of our own language ability. On the other hand, if we really want to, we can sit down and diagram sentences and put together lists of vocabulary words and analyze rhetorical devices as well. It doesn't hurt to do those things. I don't think that really does the job of providing you with the tools to be a great orator necessarily. I often find that having written something that I'm proud of, I can go back over it and say, I used that there, I used that there, and you can see the rhetorical devices, but they emerge spontaneously rather than consciously. And in fact, when they emerge consciously, it's often audible to the listener that they were inserted consciously. Let's take a look at some of the rhetorical devices. First of all, the concept of a rhetorical device. There are so many different ones in the English language. I've got a great long list of them in the classroom, but they're not that important. You probably use them yourself. But you can create a complex taxonomy that defines them all. What's a taxonomy?
I should know this.
Isn't it like a chart?
Well, taxonomy certainly can be a chart. It's a categorization of levels of categorization. For example, you've got the standard one that you probably all learned about, the categories of life forms. We've got kingdom, phylum, class, and order, family, genus, species, variety. That's the taxonomy of life forms. And of course, we can apply taxonomy to a lot of different things. When it comes to the taxonomy of rhetorical devices, there are the simple ones, things like simple ones escape me at the moment. Alliteration. When you start a number of words with the same starting sound. You see what I mean? Alliteration. And then others in which one uses coordination. Coordination is also a standard device whenever you're writing anything, and that is the listing of items in a parallel format. He walked into the room, said a few words, and then threw the ball. We've got three different things taking place there. Now, those multiple things, they can be anything. They can be subjects, they can be objects, they can be adjectives, they can be verbs. We can do anything we like with them, but we will see that one happening here. One of the devices he uses is one of the most common in speech, and that is the anaphora. And it's probably one you haven't heard of, but it's very common. Let's just look at the beginning of this speech. It is a great honor. He goes on and talks about this. Of course, this is his speech delivered by Jacob Appelbaum on behalf of the absent Edward Snowden in receipt of this whistleblower award. And he said, notice that I've put in red the items that we wanted to look at here. It is not I, but the public who has affected this powerful change to abrogation of basic constitutional rights by secret agencies. It is not I, but newspapers around the world who have risen to hold our governments to the issues when powerful officials sought to distract from these very issues with rumor and insult. It is not I, but certain brave representatives in government around the world who are proposing new protections, limits, and safeguards to prevent future assault on our private rights and private lives. That's just masterfully written. When you think about it. Now, of course, he's got this, it is not I, it is not I, it is not I, repeated. In general, when writing or speaking, one wants to avoid repetition. You want certainly to avoid using a particularly unusual phrase again and again. Certainly when writing, this is to be avoided. But in some cases, you want to repeat it because you want to emphasize it. And so we have to be able to distinguish which one is which. Notice this little note here on anaphora, the deliberate repetition of a word or phrase at the beginning of several successive verses, clauses, or paragraphs. For example, we shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and the streets, we shall fight in the hills. Winston Churchill. Another one that you've all heard is, and you know which one I'm going to say? No. I have a dream. And he repeats that one 4 times. A magical number, however, here is 3. And we'll find that the number 3 is the perfect number of items to put into a series for maximum effect. Notice that he does that right in here. Proposing new protections, limits, and safeguards. 3 is the right number. 4 is too many. If he stopped at 2, it wouldn't be quite enough. So even if limits and safeguards are really almost synonymous, it's worth saying both of them just to make sure that there are 3 items there. Okay. So anaphora, you'll never forget that one, right? Okay, we can look at all the others if you'd like. And then you get terribly bogged down when we start talking about antimaria and anadiplosis. They're one thing after another that one can use, and it's worth knowing what they are perhaps, but don't get bogged down in all these words. That's not necessarily going to help you a great deal. Okay, notice that he does the same thing here, though it's not necessarily always at the beginning. My gratitude belongs to all of those who have reached out to their friends and family to explain why suspicionless surveillance matters. It belongs to the man in the mask in the street on a hot day and the woman with a sign and an umbrella in the rain. It belongs to the young people in college with a civil liberties sticker on their laptop and the kid in the back of the class in high school making memes. This is remarkable writing. Now, I don't say for certain that Snowden necessarily wrote it without assistance. He certainly worked with some of the greatest orators in the world. I think Glenn Greenwald is certainly one of those. But this is really beautifully put together. Now here, instead of using that repetition, he is simply linking things together in coordination in sets of 3. Notice the sets of 3 here. Yet the happiness of this occasion for me is tempered by an awareness of the road traveled to bring us here today. In contemporary America, the combination of, and I put in the numbers here so that you can find them, weak legal protections for whistleblowers. 2, bad laws that provide no public interest defense. And 3, a doctrine of immunity for officials who have strayed beyond the boundaries of law, has perverted the system of incentives that regulates secrecy in government. Got the 3 items there in parallel. Okay, and this results in a situation that associates an unreasonably high price with maintaining the necessary foundation of our liberal democracy, our informed citizenry. Speaking truth to power has cost whistleblowers their 1, freedom, 2, family, or 3, country. And indeed, that happened to the author of this. Okay. This I wanted to put in antithesis. You know what the word antithesis means, probably. It's something that's antithetical, is something that's opposite or contradictory. If the penalty for providing secret information to a foreign government in bad faith is less than the penalty for providing that information to the public in good faith, are we not incentivizing spies rather than whistleblowers? That's extremely powerful concept and just beautifully stated. And again, here we've got the contrast here, the bad faith and good faith, this secrecy and then publicity. We've got these items balanced in there. Okay, the whole thing is beautifully done, and of course the context Jacob Appelbaum puts it in is really also very poignant. This was done in Germany, and if one understands a little bit of the history of Germany, we understand why the whistleblowers tend to go there. Because in Germany, there's a great deal of support for objection to overweening and repressive governments, because they've gone through them and the people don't want it again. And I don't mean just I'm sure you've heard of the Nazis and the Gestapo. What does Gestapo stand for, by the way, anybody? Geheimstaatspolizei means secret state police. But also the Stasi of the Eastern Germany until the wall came down was incredibly repressive. Every phone call was tapped, every letter was open. It was really extremely oppressive. And the German people don't want to see that again. And they've erected safeguards in one way or another. And that was the context that I think he was expecting him to address there. Any questions on this? Any comments on this particular address? Was it an appropriate one to choose for what we're looking at?
I think so.
If you haven't had a chance to listen to it, listen to his presentation.
All right.
Because it's moving as well as just brilliantly put together. Okay. We will land there at some point, but I was hoping or expecting that everyone would have accomplished more there than we did. Let's take a little bit of that, actually read it in here. Okay, here's Robert Fisk. Now, Robert Fisk is a journalist. He's probably the most decorated journalist in the world. He's fairly elderly now. He keeps on trying to retire, but everybody wants him to, come in and give the world his take on what's going on in the Middle East. He's an expert on the Middle East. Importantly, perhaps also, he has a doctorate in political theory and more than half a dozen honorary doctorates from various different places. He's an educated person. I remember when I first came across an article by him, a report by him in a was hunting around at foreign newspapers, and I found one in Pakistani newspaper, this report by Robert Fisk. And I started to read it, and I said, my goodness, we've got a journalist who can write. And then I started looking all over to other newspapers to see if I could find more by him, but most of it was by subscription only. But now with YouTube, most of what he says is out there in one way or another. This was a lecture he gave in Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley. And it's on journalism. Okay. What did you think of the lecture itself? That, I gather that's all you had a chance to look at, right?
No, I had a chance to look at a few of the other things, but I did think that the lecture was really good. And it did make a good point that most journalism today isn't written well.
Right, right. And when it is written well, it's so much more powerful. And this is something we're going to see again and again, is that the word, whether spoken or written, can be an extremely powerful tool. But there are so many ways that it can be sharpened, so to speak. And a large part of that is determining what image you want to come across with, as well as the message you're presenting. But what image do you want your audience to have of you? And there are a lot of answers to that. Do you want it to be academic? Do you want every possible grammatical turn of phrase to be put together as the best academics would, or do you want to bring it down to a more accessible level, perhaps? And that's a question that one has to answer depending on what impression you want to give to what audience. And so my assumption is that if we aim high, we can always water it down a little bit, but we want to be able to do it at the highest possible level. Okay, what is he saying in here? One of the interesting things that he said was he had a letter that had been shared with him, and he got permission to use this letter. And it was written by an officer in the Marines in, I forget the Iraqi city that it was taking place in. Anyway, and he reads this, and indeed it's beautiful prose. Let's just read it here. I've highlighted this part of it. This poor soldier, it's not, I gather, what you're supposed to call a Marine, but he's writing home. He says, the instinct to impose order and command the requisite discipline in the Iraqi leadership must be quelled in order to allow sovereign stewardship to develop in its native pace and in a native form. I fight myself to remain insignificant in the process. I haven't the nature for passive observation. I share the American fascination with action, and it has consistently betrayed us in our foreign policy. Our continued involvement will continue the state of dependency, and our eventual departure will leave nothing but cosmetic structure here. Iraq will return to what it is. Our common sense is not common to these people, and that understanding must be given proper respect. I do my best, but I twitch with an urge for the folly of intrusion. And of course, at that point, he got, applause from the audience. It's just marvelously put together. But the thing was, he was saying, and here is a soldier who writes better than journalists do. But he doesn't bother to tell you the name of this particular soldier. But also, it's important to understand that Robert Fisk, despite academic credentials, does not use the internet, does not Google things, does not research things that way. A little bit of quick research revealed who this soldier was, and this Marine is one Benjamin Bush. And whereas Fisk is certainly accurate in reporting that Major Bush is not schooled in journalism, and is most certainly correct in his assertion that Bush writes far better than do most journalists, the search revealed that he admitted one highly relevant and significant fact. The seemingly anomalous literary mastery demonstrated by Bush becomes far less baffling when one learns that he's indeed a college graduate, but more significantly, that his father, Frederick Bush, the one to whom the letter was written, was a prolific author, the recipient of a raft of literary awards, and professor emeritus of literature at Colgate University. Okay, so what did Fisk miss? Homeschooling. Well, he may not have been homeschooled, but you don't write to a father like that without giving due thought to the words that you're using. Let's just look at this little section here. The extent to which Major Bush was influenced by his father is quite evident, not just in his writing, but more clearly and inescapably in the presence of a parental relationship that would occasion the writing of such a considered and well-crafted letter. Indeed, this is not a father to whom a son would send the colloquial, malformed, disconnected ramblings so characteristic of informal American conversational language usage. These words, penned so eloquently for the elder Bush, reflect a standard of verbal communication common to father and son, a beauty of expression, which is perhaps far better assimilated through the nurture of unschooling than through any number of formal lecture classes and seminars. Major Bush's sentences were finely and intricately sculpted for a reader whom he knew to be worthy and appreciative of them. Okay, so you see the point I'm trying to make in there. Anyway, I recommend following the work of Robert Fisk. He is Smith's, and he also makes a point of getting in there and learning things. Interesting, he doesn't use the internet, but he speaks all the different languages, which again is something that I think is so critical in a way. How do you understand people of a different culture if you have to have everything in translation? And I'm afraid, especially in this country, we tend to fall into that trap. We tend not to really understand or appreciate what's going on in the rest of the world, and assume that that they're doing as we are telling them to do, and that are universal. We're seeing a great deal of objection to that. Okay, any other questions or comments on that one? I do recommend you look at that article if you'd like. Simply quote the Homeschooling and the Art of Language, the homeschooler. Okay, let's look and see what else we have. This Donald, not Daniel, Donald Trefusis is an imaginary, fictitious character created by Stephen Fry. And did any of you get a chance to listen to this one?
Yes, I did.
Okay, good. Tell me what you thought of it.
I mean, it was a really interesting story. And, well, the biggest thing I found was that it's kind of depressing that he didn't finish it.
It is. One wonders if he will pick it up at some point. Do you understand why he didn't finish it?
I read up on the internet, and it said that he didn't have enough time, and he said he didn't want to continue it at that time.
Right. I think another factor which plays a role in this is that Fry suffers from bipolarity, and fairly severe condition of it. In fact, he has done a documentary on manic depression, Secret Life of the Manic Depressive, and I believe that's out on YouTube, and it's beautifully done, in which he addresses it from a number of different directions and interviews a number of people who suffer from it. but one of the characteristics is these periods of intense elation and industry, during which the person does not even sleep, just goes straight on and produces this immense quantity of output. And then you get this drop off and it suddenly stops. And you can almost see this having happened in this particular project that he was working on at the time. It's terribly unfortunate, of course, when it does. It's given us a great deal, though, in a way. Were you aware that Georg Frederick Handel, who wrote the Messiah, wrote the Messiah in 2 weeks in a manic high? I mean, this is an incredible output that comes from things like that, but then they suffer for it. Okay, one of the things that I enjoy so much when listening to Fry, especially this in which he is being deliberately academic, is I find words in there that I hadn't come across before. So I put a few words down here. I think there are only a couple in here that I didn't know, but I thought they might be useful to you folks. Let's just go through them here. Chattel, you heard of the word chattel? Turns out it's specifically a legal term for those articles that might be part of an inheritance that are movable personal property. Disseminate. He actually defines the word disseminate in there. Do you remember what it meant?
That one, didn't that one mean to like break apart?
It could, I suppose, but really it means to scatter, to spread to the winds. And it's related to the word for seed. Disseminate. So to cast a seed about a field, for example, would be to disseminate seed. Cliche, you're familiar with, right? What is it? Cliche?
It's like a generalization.
It can be a generalization, but certainly something that's overused. It's a phrase which has lost its flavor, so to speak. I think about a phrase having lost its flavor like chewing gum having lost its flavor, in the sense that you've over-chewed it and it's not worth chewing anymore. Let's see if we can find a new one, which is my point. But those are things one generally wants to avoid. Cache is has multiple meanings. It can be a repository. It can be a trove, if you'd like. But also in a modern computer sense, it can be a rapidly accessible repository of storage repository that prevents one or eliminates the need to go to a slower, more capacious source. Irksome? How would you define irksome?
Annoying.
Very good. Annoying. That's exactly right. Tedious.
Think of a meticulous person.
Something that you can do it, it's just really exhausting to do. Like busy work is tedious.
Busy work is tedious. Yeah. It's something generally unpleasant, and usually it's especially in school, it tends to be associated with that which is of no particular value. Okay, I'm not going to go through the rest of these, but I thought I just stuck them up there. I thought they might be of use. The one that I had not seen before was codicil, which is another legal term for an addendum to a previously existing testament. And also fidus achates. That's obviously a quote that's probably not all that commonly used, but a faithful friend or devoted follower. Okay, let's jump into something while we have time here. I realize that you have to leave us early, and so let's look at Tolkien a little bit more. We got a chance to talk about it in general terms last time. And of course, my assumption was that, where are we here? that the audiobook of Tolkien, which had been posted out there, would remain, and apparently didn't remain more that week. I still think the audiobook is to be recommended. We'll see if we can find it, largely because it's so brilliantly read. It's read by someone who understood Tolkien's background and the dialects with which he would be familiar, and the places that that would have inspired him in his study and in his work. And of course, he loved words. Now, I've got another list of words that I've given you folks. I believe that's in our agenda here. Did you get a chance to look at those? And again, I don't want to spend too much time on them, but here we are. We just don't use these words very much in English, but they're such delightful words, some of them. A valley, where here we might call it a gulch or an arroyo or something like that, whereas a glen or a dell or a dingle, just nicer words for things. See if you can incorporate those into your vocabulary. The wold, I believe we talked about that last time. Anybody remember? The wold's an unforested area. It may be planted. It may be fields of, in the case of the Lady of Shalott, fields of rye. But okay, and a spinney, we talked about that one. Did anybody remember from last week?
Clump of trees, right?
Very good. Small clump of trees. It's a word that's used in Winnie the Pooh in the chapter Where the Woozle Wasn't. Now, when you say where the woozle wasn't, what rhetorical device am I using there? Where the woozle wasn't.
Alliteration.
Absolutely. Very good. Okay. And a glade, again, an open space in a forest, a dingle, a closed area. Has everybody had a chance to look at these and look them all up?
I didn't look them all up.
I've looked at some of them.
Okay. I don't want you to have to go through lists and look them all up and memorize them. Really not worth it. But it's nice to know they're there, and it's nice to know how to look them up quickly if you want to. Also, when it comes to memorizing, this is something I want to just share with you. There are devices, there are methods for memorizing. And memorization is not that important. I mean, it's not regarded as real education as such. But the fact is, if you know how to memorize, you'll find it'll get you through an awful lot of classes, because most classes don't require you to do any more than simply memorize and then feed it back up again. And if you learn some methods for doing it, and you're able to look at a list of 20 words, and within less than 20 seconds manage to incorporate them into your memory and be able to list them off, that's a useful skill, and it's not a particularly difficult one to acquire. We can go over it at some point if you'd like. Has anyone here studied that or practiced it?
No. Mainly the way I pick up vocabulary is just reading.
Well, yes, this is the way to do it. Of course, no, I'm sorry, I haven't even had a chance to talk with you folks about this. But the fact is, I have here, doesn't you remember where it is? The vocabulary forums.
Oh,
I forget where it is in the new classroom.
Yeah, I've only gone onto the new
I know it's in
page here a few times, so I don't really know it that well. Yeah.
Here we are, vocabulary journals. Let's just go in there quickly. This is a place where I'd like you all to start a vocabulary journal. Whenever you're reading, yes, you're going to come across words, but you don't want to lose them. Once you've, once you've learned them, you want to keep them. So keep a list. And if you'll keep a list here, it'll benefit all of us. We can all learn from everybody else's vocabulary list. I think everybody should keep a vocabulary list. Get your parents to keep a vocabulary list. Think you can do that? Anyway, I've moved these over from the other classrooms, so they're fairly small. I've put up Connor's and Kyle's and in here and Diana's. Now I've made a point of keeping one myself. I don't necessarily recommend it particularly because most of the words that I have worked with. Oh, here we've got a whole bunch of. That's Kyle's. That's Kyle's. Okay, that's not what I was thinking.
And we just start a journal by clicking add a new discussion topic.
Yeah, add a new discussion topic. And then what I'd like you to do is after you've added the first one, whenever you add more to it, add them as replies to the first one. So it ends up being just sort of a long thread, a long string of replies. Yeah, this was the one that I put up there. Now, I think it's better to put a little more than just one or two at a time. But if you're interested in just looking at, I've collected this over a number of years, and I find looking back on it, saying, okay, I didn't realize I ever didn't know that. But you look through it periodically and refresh your memory. You learn words, and it doesn't take long before you achieve a sort of closure. That is to say, you encounter new words, but I've seen that one before. You see what I mean? Now, there are teachers, and my daughter was talking about a teacher that she encountered in junior college who minimizes the importance of vocabulary and tries to limit the vocabulary he used in class. But my goodness, what a disservice you're doing to your students when you do that, because these words do exist. They do exist in literature, and they will certainly exist in the oratory that we're going to be studying. So it's worth acquiring that. Let's go over here and look at part of the story here. Now, have not read this at all, is that right?
The farthest I've gotten is the prologue that's about concerning hobbits.
Okay, that's not very far.
Yeah.
How about you, Dawson? You haven't read it?
I haven't read it in about a year.
But you have read it?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, there are a lot of people who read it religiously every year. One of whom is Christopher Lee. Anybody know who he is? The actor who plays Saruman in the movies. It's unfortunate. I think he would have made a better Gandalf. After all, it's nice to have an actor who is so devoted to a book that he reads it every year and knows it from beginning to end. But let's. I came in intending to pick it up, having something to base this on, but we start out in the Shire. The Shire, the word Shire is a very English word, and indeed everything in this is very English and based on English tradition. What is the Shire like? Would you like to give us what are hobbits like? What are hobbits of the Shire like?
Well, they're small folk, and they have very tough feet, and they're very peaceful. And they usually don't really go out on any kind of adventures, and they usually don't go outside of the Shire.
They really don't like using machines. They rather use their hands. Or tools.
Yeah.
Very good point.
They're used to their quiet life and they don't really like people.
Excellent,
Yep.
excellent. The most complicated machine they're willing to put up with is a windmill, I gather, or water mill. Yeah, very good, exactly. And so it's really based on people that Tolkien was indeed himself familiar with. But introduces into this world some serious evil. And also, at the other end of the spectrum, remarkably beatific and resplendent good people at the same time. So it's this wonderful spectrum. At the evil end, we have the necromancer, whose name is
Sarah?
Yeah.
Sauron.
Yeah.
Exactly. And Sauron is a lesser god turned bad. And at the other end of the spectrum, though, we have and his henchmen, of course, he has many servants, evil servants of different sorts, including other lesser gods, whom we're going to encounter, one of whom is called a Balrog, or a category of whom called the Balrog, which we'll come across. But then at the other end, we have the elves and the other gods. Now, there are some of those running around. In fact, it's probable that that's what he thought of Tom Bombadil as being. And there are, in the stories, other gods that play their roles. And very possibly the wizards themselves. And the wizards themselves, we know that they're immortal. We know there are originally 5 of them. We know this actually came out in the film. They talked about that. It's a rather obscure point in the books. But the wizard that we know the most about is Gandalf the Grey. And he has specific talents. Specifically, he's a master of fire. And he was involved, and you saw the Hobbit movie, didn't you?
I haven't seen any of them.
Any of them? Oh my goodness. Okay.
I read The Hobbit when I was in
Oh.
6th or 7th grade, but I can't remember it that well.
Okay. Well, the Hobbit is a story of there and back again. And that's actually the official subtitle, in which Gandalf persuades this young hobbit, Bilbo, young hobbit, 50 years old, as young as hobbits go, I gather, to go off on an adventure. And he does go off on this adventure, and that's what takes place in The Hobbit, ending in the Battle of 5 Armies, and he comes back with these chests of gold, and the dragon was slain, and so forth. And so that's when this starts out. Now, Bilbo has no offspring, but he adopts a nephew as his heir, and this nephew is named Frodo. And they share the same birthday. And so they celebrate their birthdays together, and that's how the book starts. We have them celebrating this birthday. And the way hobbits celebrate birthdays is interesting. Instead of receiving presents, they give presents to the people who come. And this was a particularly lavish one, with food and acrobats and all kinds of things taking place in it. But one of the things that Bilbo brought back with him was a ring that he found in the mountain, actually. And it turns out that this ring had belonged to a strange creature who actually was probably a hobbit, who had lived for many millennia, or many hundreds of years anyway, inside this mountain, named Gollum. Now, the interesting concept here is that this ring is a ring of power. And as such, it's dangerous. Now, I rather like this concept that Tolkien presents, that anybody who sees it wants it, and yet it will corrupt any who possess it. And so the wise people, Gandalf, for example, refuse to have anything to do with it because they know its corrupting influence. And it has indeed corrupted people at various different points, but it's also a ring of power. I see an interesting parallel here between this and the story that we talked about, the acceptance speech. We're talking about an immense amount of power. And indeed, of course, the power that we're talking about there is the ability to see everything that everyone thinks. or at least everything they type on a keyboard, everything they say on the phone, everything they read, everything they watch on television, the names of everyone to whom they talk, and everyone they talk to, and everything they say. And all of those things we know now to be recorded and archived, which is, that's a lot of power in somebody's hand. Whether they are using it correctly or not is a different question, but is it possible that one can look upon that as a parallel in the sense that the existence alone of that kind of power is necessarily going to cause it to be misused? You think so?
I think so.
It's an interesting point. It's an interesting point. And if perhaps, as has been the case in Tolkien's story, we've got a number of people who really intend to use the ring for good, but it never quite works out that way. And so it's an interesting parallel. I just thought I'd throw it out there. Do you know whom I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Boromir?
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so we've got this ring, and Bilbo is the only person who ever came into possession of it, who, of his own volition, turned it over to somebody else. And Gandalf felt that was his salvation. That was his redemption. That having consciously and deliberately said, okay, I'm going to give it to somebody else, he didn't fall under its spell, and he would no longer suffer from it. And he passes it on to his nephew Frodo. And then we have now the finding of the ring. Well, let's not worry about that so much, except that Bilbo finds it and has used it to some extent. What does the ring do specifically? When putting it on, it makes one invisible. Turns out later we find it's not so much that it makes one invisible, but it makes one traverse a barrier between two worlds and go into another world, and where one is not visible in this one, but becomes more visible to the denizens of that other world. And so we learn that later on. But up to this point, it's been useful to him, and he's used it from time to time. Put the ring on, and he can disappear. Now we have this long discussion. Here's that poem, by the way, that I talked about last time. It's got this wonderful little poetry popping up from time to time. You get this long discussion in which Frodo and Gandalf speak. And Tolkien wrote this one fairly early on, and then years passed before he got an opportunity to really expand on the story and take it on further. And in this one, we learn a little bit about what's going on, where the ring came from, and Gandalf does eventually discover, although he already guesses, that this is in fact the major ring. And he, of course, has learned about all these rings. This is well known in Elvish lore. This little poem. It's 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the dark lord on his dark throne in land of Mordor where the shadows lie. 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. And Ashnaz Gimbatuluk, I don't remember the whole thing, but that's indeed what this says, because it's not in the common speech, it's in the language of Mordor. But the alphabet is Tengwar, which is one of the alphabets of the elves, and there are multiple alphabets. And the languages, of course, preceded the people and their traditions and those traditions preceded the story. So we have all of this enclosing background and mythology upon which we're building things. I realize that you are getting to a point where you will have to leave us. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, I leave it up to you when you want to do that.
I'll go ahead and I'll stop the recording, and then
Okay,
maybe in about 5 minutes I'll get up and leave.
okay. Okay, so what he does, and I'm sure you remember this, Dawson, but it turns out that this is an unadorned ring, and Gandalf is guessing that it is the one ring, the one that was fashioned, that was intended to enslave all of the other rings. But he doesn't know for certain, and he finds out by throwing it into the hottest part of the fire. When it warms up, these letters are visible on it. And he was expecting that to be the case because he had read about a description of that ring that was written by Isildur. Now, what happened was this ring originally belonged to the evil sorcerer, the necromancer, Sauron, who was defeated in battle with an alliance of men and elves. Gil-galad was the king of the elves at the time, and Elendil was the king of the men, and they defeated him. Although they died in the process, Isildur, the son of Elendil, cut the ring from Sauron's hand and took it for his own. And he sat down and described it, and Gandalf found that description. And the description explained that this was on the ring, and therefore he knew this must be indeed be the ring by heating it up and then reading it. And so now he realizes that Sauron has, and he wants to do everything he can to get it back because he let a lot of his power pass into the ring. And the ring is going to corrupt anyone who carries it. But Gandalf has a lot of faith in hobbits and unexpected strength that he finds in hobbits. And especially, he noticed this in Bilbo, and he has confidence in Frodo to manage to handle it. But what do they want to do with it? They can't destroy it. It can't be destroyed, or at least it can't be destroyed in any way that we know of. Theoretically, it could be destroyed by dragons breathing, but we didn't. And apparently there were no dragons available for that. The only other way to do it would be to throw it into the cracks of doom, into the molten magma in the Orodruin, the mountain. But that mountain is in Mordor, in the land of shadows. So this gives us sort of the background, the story, and where it's going to go. Okay, we'll see you next week. See if you can read that, and I'll see if I can find some other sources for it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll go to read more.
Okay,
I'll
great.
watch the videos too.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, this beginning of the story, I think, is one of the most delightful parts of the whole thing. The Shadow of the Past, of course, gives us all of this background, and by all means, read it, but then skip it if you think that it's just a little bit too ponderous, and we'll go on to more interesting things. What happens is that this is all about the story of how Gollum came by the ring. He found it or his brother or cousin Déagol found it in the river Anduin, and he kills brother for it. So it's okay. So what happens here is Frodo and Gandalf decide, really, the ring cannot remain here because the evil lord knows about the Shire and knows about the name Baggins. How did he know? Well, it turns out that that Bilbo had mentioned this, had said it to Gollum when he had that discussion with Gollum in the Hobbit, and that Gollum had been to Mordor, and the evil sorcerer had learned this from him. And so the result is that it's not safe in the Shire. And indeed, the Shire itself may not be safe. And they discuss that, and I'd let you go ahead and read and listen to that. Okay, so set off, but how does he do that if he just disappears and takes off the way Bilbo did? How did Bilbo take off?
Well, he just got up and left.
He got up and left the first time when he went with the dwarves, but then when he left after the party, he did so by standing up on a chair and giving a speech, and then putting the ring on, and vanished. And of course, this got everybody talking, and it's a dreadful thing. But Frodo decides he's going to do it differently. He's going to pretend to move to a different part of the Shire, and then keep going. And this he does, but he decides he likes the Shire so much. He loves it so much. He wants to do a trek through it. And so he and a couple of other friends decide to travel through it. And these friends are his gardener, Samwise Gamgee, and Pippin Took, Peregrine Took. And they decide to travel across through the Shire. And this is just a beautiful part of the story, I think, itself. And that's the part I was expecting everybody to read for today. Let's make sure to do it for next time, if you could.
Yeah.
But even before he takes off, he keeps on waiting, expecting Gandalf to come back and tell him to go. Gandalf doesn't come. It turns out Gandalf is busy with things elsewhere. But they take off. But when they take off, a stranger comes to the Shire, a black rider, all in black on a full-sized horse, asking for the name Baggins, asking for Baggins. And they decide it's probably not a good idea to talk to this character. And they go off, and they on their way through the Shire, this black rider catches up with them. And this is really a creepy part of the story. We don't know anything about this black rider, what the black rider is. Do you remember what it is?
Yeah.
Yeah. We learn later on that if we look at that poem, that these 9 mortal men doomed to die are now servants of, very powerful servants of the Dark Lord himself, and they are the Black Riders. Anyway, in the process of crossing the Shire, and at one point when they're actually being stalked by the Black Rider, who comes onto the scene but some elves, just sort of wandering through at night. And turns out that they are high elves, rather unexpectedly, under the leadership of Gildor Inglorion. And Frodo gets talking to him. Frodo, having learned a good deal, and in fact learned a little bit of the Elvish language from Bilbo, who had learned it, which we learn about in the other story, manages to talk with them, and they invite them, uncharacteristically, to stay with them for the night, with the elves. Elves don't sleep, by the way, so that's an interesting point. And the discussion then that takes place with Gildor is very interesting and eye-opening. And that discussion is going to be the end of the part that I assigned for you folks to read. So we will get through that perhaps next time. This is an absolutely astounding book. the language itself, as I've mentioned before, tends to rise as one goes through the book and becomes more and more elegant, more and more uh, um, formal as the book goes along. And Tolkien was aware of having done this, so I think in that respect it's rather nice. But I do think we need some language that's perhaps a little bit more challenging than Tolkien as well. So I think I need to try to find some other things for you to listen to as well. Let's see where we stand here. Oh, we've still got a little time. Great. Now, given that we do have a little more time here, usually I have some projects handed in. Well, Connor and Kyle had other projects this week and other tests to be taking, so we don't have anything there. And so the other main project that we were looking at for this week was Much Ado About Nothing. Did you get a chance to watch that?
Oh, yes, I did.
Okay. One of the questions I had is perhaps we'd like to read just a little bit of Tolkien, and then we can go on and look at the other one a little bit. Where would you suggest that we start here?
Well, you've only read the very first part of it, right?
Yeah. I'm still in the part concerning hobbits.
Okay. So I guess maybe at the very beginning, maybe.
Well, I'm actually rather suggesting that perhaps you skip parts of the beginning, because the beginning is so laden with background. It's actually hard to get into. It's one of the hardest books to get into, because we've got all of this concerning hobbits and what hobbits are all about and how the Shire was organized, and then it talks about pikeweed, trying to explain that pikeweed is some form of nicotiana, and he actually says that in here, and it's tradition and the fact that hobbits enjoyed smoking. Then the ordering of the Shire, there's all this background, and then we get the finding of the ring, which gives you a little bit more, which of course is covered in the Hobbit. Note on the Shire records, we talk here about how their calendars and how all of this that fits in. Then finally we get to the long expected party. Jump straight to the long expected party. If you have any questions about the other things, you can go back and get that material later on. And then we have the party itself. A great deal of description goes into the party. And here we have, for example, there's the rune. That's a G rune, the elf rune. And there is the Tengwar G, and it stands for Gandalf. Okay. After a long expected party, we have the shadow of the past. There we are. And that's a long chapter that gives us all this background. I'd like to, let's choose something in the middle. Here, just read a little bit here. This is where they meet Gildor, but we can go back a little bit further. Let's look here. Gandalf and Frodo are speaking. Now here they're talking about the ring itself and its effect. All seemed well with Bilbo, and the years passed. Yes, they passed, and seemed not to touch him. He showed no signs of age. The shadow fell on me again. I said to myself, after all, he comes from a long-lived family on his mother's side. There is time yet. Wait. This is what Gandalf is thinking himself, because indeed possession of the great rings brings with it longevity. And that's what makes him worry that maybe this is one of the great rings. And I waited until that night when he left the house. He said he'd He said and did things that filled me with fear that no words of Saruman could allay. I knew at last that something dark and deadly was at work, and I have spent most of the years since then in finding out the truth of it. Okay, now Saruman, one of the five wizards who were sent to help out on Middle Earth. Saruman is, we discover, has his problems, but interestingly, the role he plays in the Hobbit movie, and indeed up through the Hobbit, he's still regarded as being the head of the White Council and the head of the wizards. The White Council includes the wizards and also the great elves. But Saruman kept on saying, oh no, the ring is gone, the ring has been lost, it'll never be found again. It turns out Saruman wants it. Okay, there wasn't any permanent harm done, was there? Asked Frodo anxiously. He would get all right in time, wouldn't he? Be able to rest in peace, I mean. He felt better once. We're talking here about the fact that Bilbo actually relinquished the ring. And, okay, but there's one power, he felt better at once. There's only one power in this world that knows all about the rings and their effects. And as far as I know, there's no power in the world that knows all about hobbits. Notice the use of antithesis in that sentence. Among the wise, I'm the only one that goes in for hobbit lore, an obscure branch of knowledge, but full of surprises. Soft as butter they can be, and yet sometimes as tough as old tree roots. I think it likely that some would resist the rings far longer than most of the wise would believe. I don't think you need worry about Bilbo. Of course, he possessed the ring for many years and used it, so it might take a long while for the influence to wear off, before it was safe for him to see it again, for instance. Otherwise, he might live on for years quite happily, just stop as he was when he parted with it. But he gave it up in the end of his own accord, an important point. No, I was not troubled about Bilbo anymore once he had let the thing go. It is for you that I feel responsible. Ever since Bilbo left, I have been deeply concerned about you and about all these charming, absurd, helpless hobbits. It would be a grievous blow to the world if the dark power overcame the Shire. If all your kind, jolly, stupid Bolgers, Hornblowers, Boffins, Bracegirdles, and the rest, not to mention the ridiculous Bagginses, became enslaved. Frodo shuddered. But why should we be, he asked, and why should he want such slaves? To tell you the truth, replied Gandalf, I believe that hitherto, mark you, he has entirely overlooked the existence of hobbits. You should be thankful. But your safety has passed. He does not need you. He has many more useful servants. But he won't forget you again. And hobbits as miserable slaves would please him far more than hobbits happy and free. There is such a thing as malice and revenge. Revenge, said Frodo. I still don't understand what all this has to do with Bilbo and myself and our ring. It has everything to do with it, said Gandalf. You do not know the real peril yet, but you shall. I was not sure of it myself until I was last here, but the time has come to speak. Give me the ring for a moment. And here he takes it off and does the demonstration and sees the markings on it, which he expected to see, having researched it. And one of the things that we see in Tolkien, of course, is this reverence for lore, this reverence for knowledge and scholarship. Because after all, he was at Oxford Dawn. And this permeates the story itself. And it's a delightful thing, I think, a wonderful feature to include in that kind of a story. And one that I think that we would be well advised to try to understand and incorporate into our schooling as well. Typical public school assumptions tend to be very plotting, very constrained and confined in what one is expected to learn and the perspective one is expected to acquire on things. Whereas if we are learning on our own, or at least if we open the world to our study, there's so much more out there. And there's so many ways to learn things so much more effectively and so much faster than one does in a class full of 30 kids all trying to plod along at the same pace. It just really doesn't work. So what I'd like to do in this class is go in whatever direction is going to be most useful for us. Now, I understand the literature, I understand what's there, but I'm not necessarily going to inflict it or impose it upon everyone. I want to find out where the interest lies with you folks. Tolkien is wonderful, but I don't want to spend a long time going through Tolkien. I think it's something that you should read all the way through, but we're not necessarily going to discuss it chapter by chapter, even book by book, because there's just so much else to look at. And there's only so much we're going to gain from this. So the question is, direction we should go next, and this is probably something that should be conferred upon with the rest of the class, but we'll look at that a little more later on. One suggestion that was made that I'm not necessarily in favor of is one other Shakespeare play that was done by the same group that did the one that you just saw, the Much Ado About Nothing. They also did The Taming of the Shrew. And the question was whether that might be of some interest. I haven't had a chance to look at their version of it yet, but I understand that they've tried to interpret it differently. The original story is one that tends to be avoided in schools, and understandably, because it's terribly politically incorrect. It's about the word shrew is used to refer to a lady who is, well, actually, shrewd comes from the same root, but who's just terribly contumacious, irascible, and overbearing, and uncooperative. And she ends up being married to, rather unwillingly, to this man who decides he's going to tame her, and he does so. And so it's not necessarily a wonderful plot, but it has its points. Should we skip that, do you think?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
I mean, one of the things that interested me was earlier you talked about that memorization skill.
Yeah.
And do you have any resources for that?
Yes, I do, if I can find them. I did actually teach a class here on memory at one point. And the methodologies, there are a number of different ones, different people put together, and quite a few of them are online and available. And also, I believe they have a nice book on it out here in the bookstore. But some of the methods, for example, that were used in ancient Greece for remembering a speech, and indeed, that was something that some of them were so known for being great orators, to be able to stand up and speak. And how does one memorize a speech? Well, one of the methodologies there, I'll give it to you very quickly and easily, is spatial association. I remember when my daughter needed to memorize a speech this was from Romeo and Juliet, and the lady Capulet is talking to Juliet about meeting this young Count Paris, and how she is just teaching her how to fall in love, I suppose, is what she's doing. But it's usually cut out of every version I've seen of the play, because it's hard to remember, it's hard to understand, and it doesn't really have anything to do with the rest of the plot. And so my daughter was given this to learn, and she was just tearing her hair out over it. But what we did, we were just sitting in one room in the house, was take each phrase, each sentence, and put it in a different place in the room as we wandered through the house. And we can wander through the house in our heads as well as actually doing it through the house. And within about 20 minutes, she had it done. Okay, we're now in the cupboard. Remember what she says there? You see what I mean? And this is one method for doing it, and it can be a very effective method. What you want to do is define a space, define a place where you know everything, and then learn how to associate objects with those things. So you can associate objects, or a list of names, or a list of even digits and phone numbers, or whatever it is. It can be done. And it's a muscle that you work on, and it improves. And I'm afraid in me it's rather atrophied and gets worse as I get older. But I remember at one point wanting to, let's do some recreational study. And so I decided, let's see if I can memorize the names and dates of 100 different composers in an hour. And did pretty well with it. Still remember some. But that kind of thing, it's not education. But the thing is that college tends not to be education either.
In today's world, it's really useful to just memorize all the facts so you can get a good grade on the test.
Exactly. It can also be useful in different situations to have, for example, a set of formulas at your disposal anytime you need them. Most of the time, however, in the real world, in real world applications, knowing how to bring it up is just as important as having it in your head, because in the real world, you always have a little device in your pocket nowadays, and you can look anything up with that, as long as you're not Robert Fisk. You can find everything in a matter of seconds, and so that it doesn't make a lot of sense to have it in your head. Education, however, is still in the dark ages. Education still seems to assume that in order to take a test, you have to be deprived of any resources of any sort, and sat down at a table and given a pencil and have to produce the material that way. That's gradually changing, but it always takes time for this kind of paradigm shift to take place. I may have answered your question already, but if you'd like, we can go ahead. What I'd like to suggest is come up with something that you'd like to learn. One of the things that I think is very useful is, or I won't say useful, delightful to have with one all the time is one's favorite poem, for example. Poetry is worth memorizing if it's something that's inspired you so much to begin with that you'd really like to have it with you and be able to present it at any point in the future, or just be able to run through it in your mind. If you're sitting on a bus waiting to get somewhere, for example, just to have your favorite things with you. Do you have any favorite poetry? May I introduce some that may or may not become favorite poetry? We will see. I'm not really even sure there's so many places to go for it, but a couple that come to mind, one that I've mentioned earlier today, is The Lady of Shalott You ever heard of that one? By Alfred Lord Tennyson?
I think I've heard of it. I'm not sure if I've read it before.
Let's look at that one if you'd like. It's based on the Arthurian legends, the legends of King Arthur, and it's a superbly written poem. And let's take a look at that one. Another one of the great poems. I'm just trying to think of the really remarkable ones. Is Thomas Gray's Elegy in a Country Churchyard. Have you heard of that one?
I don't think so.
The name Thomas Gray sounds familiar, but I can't place where.
Let's look at these. When it comes to the use of language, the masterful use of language, these are just remarkable examples of that. And if you can come up with something that that I'm unfamiliar with, by all means, please bring it in and share it with us. And you can just go ahead and post it in the Writers Forum. Have you learned how to post things in the Writers Forum yet?
No, but I'm pretty sure I know how. You just go to add new topic, right?
Right. And then it actually gives you a WYSIWYG editor.
Mhm.
You've got all of these tools up at the top. You can change your fonts and add lists and things like that. Really, when you're composing, I find that composing in Moodle is one of the easiest places to do it. But you may want to do it in a word processor or something.
What I
or other.
usually do is just probably make it on Word and then copy paste it.
I like doing it in this environment simply because there I can define all of my tools, and I can have lookup tools with multiple dictionaries and thesauruses and rhyming dictionaries or whatever it is that I happen to need. Good. Let's look at some poetry for next week, and also we'll use that poetry to learn how to memorize. And
then also, if we run out of topics, I'd always like to learn more writing of Winston Churchill.
Churchill wrote some wonderful things, and he was a master of rhetoric, and he was not. He was one of the best, but there are a lot of others too, and I'd like to introduce you to some of them as well. Churchill's stuff, of course, is relatively dated. We have some modern speakers who are come up to that level, and there's might be a little more relevant. So let's look at some Winston Churchill by all means. In the old classroom, I have a section on Winston Churchill, but we can also look at some of the other great speakers and thinkers, Oscar Wilde and John Stuart Mill and Bertrand Russell and P.G. Wodehouse, and explore some of those. But let's start with some of the poetry. I think that would be a nice place to go. Okay. Any other thoughts or requests or suggestions? Yeah. When you post something, write it in whatever form you want, and then just paste it directly in. Yeah. Please, you can put in attachments, but they're a pain. Let's just put it into the main body of the submission. Okay. And are you working on anything right now?
Not currently. I just finished a bunch of essay stuff. Currently I'm not really working on anything. I was just trying to think of something for me to write.
Can I help? I don't know if we can. You need to have practice writing. You need to keep writing. And the last one you did is great. It's really very fine, but you have to keep practicing and get that working. I don't know what suggestion to make really. What direction you'd like to go in there. If you're enjoying the Tolkien, by all means, why don't you write something along those lines? A critique or a commentary? Okay. Let's wind things up. And I wonder if things have continued to work properly here on our system. As far as I can tell, they did, though I'm not at all sure that representation of the classroom is really readable. We will see. Anyway, this is the end then of our broadcast for the 15th.